trauma travels through a family until one person is willing to feel it. If we go 9 generations back, you have 2048 ancestors standing behind you, and you are the tip of the spear. Around Earth, there is an energy field. Call it cosmic consciousness, the morphogenic field, the Akashic records. What you call it is irrelevant. It's just the knowing and the faith that this energy field absolutely exists around planet Earth.
So, welcome to the Real Talk with Dan Shaw. This is Gary Else, everybody, one of my best friends in the whole entire world. Gary is a very interesting human being. He's lived a million lifetimes. I'm going to try and introduce you in a succinct way in terms of the work that you're currently doing. I would describe you as a facilitator, a medicine man, and a family constellations practitioner. I'm excited to talk about your journey with the medicine, psilocybin to be precise, and just how you have gone about finding your own way of working with people, energies, the mushrooms, how you got introduced to it, all of that stuff, as well as family constellations.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the beautiful introduction. And I'm deeply honored to be here with you today. So the little process we're going to do is just to get ourselves here, to let our energies feel centered so that we can be open to spirit for doing the work we're going to do now. So it's just 2 little processes. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a little check-in just to see where we are emotionally and spiritually, going on purpose for the work we're going to do this morning. So the first thing I always do is in the check-in. So all I'm going to ask, and I'll do it first and then you can just respond, is I'm going to check in with where the shadow is in me at the moment and what the shadow is and what's the light. So I'm checking in with the shadow of a little bit of anxiety and the energy of newness bubbling. And the light I'm checking in with is gratitude, humbleness, and absolute love. So what's the shadow you feeling at the moment and the light you feeling at the moment?
I think the unknown. I'm worried that I might not get to every topic I want to get to. I'm worried that the information is not construed in the right way. Around that, like making sure that we do justice to this conversation, because the work is so important to both of us. And then the light side of it is that, as you say, this newness. This is the first episode we're doing of this, and the excitement that it brings to have these conversations, especially as South Africans. I don't feel like South Africans are given enough limelight or spotlight to be able to share the amazing work that we are doing in ourselves and for our communities.
And I totally honor you that you have seen that there's a space that hasn't been occupied yet where South African born people has a voice.
Yes.
So I thank you for that, Dan.
Okay, so I'm ready to dive in.
Fabulous.
Okay, so I want to talk about family constellations first, because for me, that's one of the most interesting phenomenons that I've ever encountered. Because, of course, when you eat mushrooms or take psilocybin, you're bound to have a euphoric spiritual kind of experience. But family constellations, when I tell people about the process of it, they're like, so there's no drugs involved. And it's like, no, we are all just connected, and that's wild. So I want to give my understanding of family constellations, and then you can correct me, please. So my understanding of the premise of it is that our fundamental needs are to be acknowledged and to be loved, from a spiritual perspective. And so family constellations gives everybody their rightful place within the family tree to be acknowledged and to be loved and seen. Because, like I was telling you, that Carl Jung quote that I read, is that all of the putrid hate
Mm.
or misbehavior of human beings stems from untold stories. Um, so acknowledging another human being is probably one of the best, most amazing gifts that we can give one another. And so, family constellations, I love how you use the analogy of a harp, is that all the chords of the harp
Mm.
are intertwined.
Mm.
The same way that if you think about many family relationships, there's many misaligned energies. And so, there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication. So, family constellations is an energetic process
Mhm.
where you get to, without having necessarily that person involved, but you get to uh, start to acknowledge people
Mm.
within their rightful place. Um, and then, so that harp is like harmonious again.
Yes.
So, same as the energetic lines within the family. Um, go.
So the first thing I want to say, Dan, is there's no correction. Your understanding of the work is your understanding, and it's perfect and it does not need correction. Sometimes when we're in a process like this where we deal with another person and we share insights, for me, it's about a widening of understanding instead of a correction. So, family constellation work is pure energy work. Like everything I do, all my work is totally based in energy. And the principle of family constellation work is to endeavor to identify and transmute trauma or any negative energy within a system. When you came and constellated with me, let's work with that because it's something we've both experienced together. The main factor I look at in a constellation is belonging. And a lot of our distress, a lot of our trauma, a lot of our dis-ease in our bodies, I truly believe comes from the sense of not belonging and not being a part of a system.
Because you said that the first wound that we ever experience is abandonment from our mother when we come out of the womb. And that's the first hurt we ever feel. So everything essentially stems from abandonment.
That's how I feel and how I approach the work. As an infant, as we're born, we don't understand the concept of abandonment, but the process of separation, of being in this incredible cocoon in our mother's womb, being a part of something so unbelievably close and intimate. When we're born, we are removed out of
Separated.
the cocoon, and
Yes.
that's the separation. And for me, that's the first sense of abandonment.
Yes. And then belonging comes from.
Yes. Then we get slapped on the bum and we get checked and we get sometimes put in a different container and taken to another room. And that's the first separation. And we do everything in our power to come back to the belonging again. So that for me is the basis I work from in a constellation session.
Mhm. So give us an example of what a constellation session looks like.
Beautiful. Yes. So when I meet the client for the first time, when I connect with the client for the first time, I will ask the client what is it that they want to work on, the intention for their constellation. What is the tension and the trauma within the system? I will ask them to complete a genogram so that I have a visual understanding of what the system looks like. Stuff I look for in the genogram is has members in the system passed over.
Can you just explain what a genogram is?
Ah,
Sorry.
a genogram is a graph where you fill in your grandparents on both your father's side and your mother's side. So the names are very important because as constellation workers completely with energy, our energy is totally locked up in our name.
Mhm.
When you say your birth names, it has a vibration.
Even
And
with astrology reading, it adds up to certain numbers.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So that's the importance of a name. So I ask for the grandparents, both father and mother's names, the father's name, the mother's name, and all the siblings that's born into the system. So when you constellate, your system you deal with is your mother, your father, and any siblings you have. Grandparents are brought in if they're necessary in the system. So that gives me a picture of, was there miscarriages? Was there abortions? It's very important to know because those beings also have a place in the system.
Yeah. I don't think many people realize that, especially with abortions.
Yes.
Every family constellation I've been a part of, if someone hasn't divulged that, it comes out in the constellation
Yes.
because once again, that child had a soul
Yes.
and it had an energetic field and it doesn't dissipate.
No.
It doesn't go away because you got rid of
Yeah.
the life force and it still needs to be acknowledged in its rightful place.
100%. Yes.
Otherwise, it starts to cause ripple effects.
Very much so,
Yeah.
Dan. Yes. In the constellations I've done since I qualified, so when I do one on one constellations, if there's an abortion or a miscarriage, I bring a candle in to represent that family member. And the energy it allows the person constellating to move into is an energy of belonging. Now I belong in the place I was born into. So on the genogram, there's 3 questions I ask the client. The first question is, what's the unresolved issue for the client within their system? Aggression, addiction, lack of communication, anything can be the unresolved issue within the family.
Mhm.
The second question I ask is, what is the magic wish? If I could give you a magic wand now and say, whatever wish you have for your family will come true, what is that wish? And the third question I ask is, at the end of the constellation, what's the end result you would like to see? What that does for me, it gives me a understanding of where the client feels the work needs to happen and what the client feels is lacking in their system. There's 2 ways to constellate, one on one or in a group where we have physical people representing each person within the system. If it's one on one work, I work with little material dolls. And if it's in a group with the representatives, and the instruction to the client is, we will start with the self first. We always start with the self because that's the energy we're bringing in. We're working with my constellation and my view of the system.
Mm.
So you will select a doll or a representative for yourself. We will clearly mark the space we work in. And I ask that you place the doll or the representative of yourself the way you see yourself within your family system and the world. The things I look for is, where are they placed? In the center, to the left, to the right, to the front, to the back. And most importantly, what direction the doll or the representative is looking
Mm.
towards. The next person we will bring into the constellation is always the mother first. For me, I always start with the mother because that's our first relationship we ever have before we're born. You will select a doll or a representative for your mother, and the instruction is to place the mother in direct relationship to yourself within the system. Once again, the placement and the direction they look in is what I focus on and look at while it's being set up. The distance between the client and the mother.
Yeah. So just to give an example of this, I'll say in my family
Mm,
constellation, I remember there was a bunch of people there, men and women, young and old.
mm,
So when I was told to get up and go choose a representative for myself,
yes.
you energetically you kind of use your intuition to feel like, yes, this person kind of feels like
Mm,
they would carry, you know, my person well. And then I'd say, would you represent me?
Yes.
and they would either say yes or no, if it felt right for them. If they said yes, I would tell them my name,
Yes.
and then I would place them. And because I have a close relationship with my mom, I would place her quite close to me. My sister and I are not so close, so when someone represented her, I put her quite far from me, but close to my mom.
That's correct.
And then with my dad, he was quite aloof,
Mm.
so we put him quite far.
That's
And
correct.
I find it so unbelievable to witness strangers carry out your exact family dynamic. I mean, it could be a husband and wife that have a close relationship that come there as individuals, but when they start representing your mom and dad, they absolutely loathe each other. There's like a hatred that's involved. Like they can't even be in the same space together. How do you, I know we're going a little bit off topic, but how do you describe that to people? That how does someone download somebody else's energy field, or I don't even know what it is,
Mm.
consciousness?
Yes. Beautiful question. For me, the way I approach the work, Dan, and what I say to representatives when they come to represent, around Earth, there is a energy field. Call it cosmic consciousness, call it the morphogenic field, call it the Akashic records. What you call it is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. It's just the knowing and the faith that this energy field absolutely exists around planet Earth. And in my understanding with the work and how I've processed the work is that every single being who's ever lived, who is living, or who one day will live, our energy and all the things we go through and experience is captured as energy in this field, and it stays around planet Earth forever. When you step into a field as a representative, I say to them they need to imagine a massive, massive library in the sky somewhere. And in this library is every person in the constellation that will be constellated. Their life book is written and kept in this library. So, as a representative, we go up into this library, we go take Dan's book, we bring it back, and throughout the constellation, we are reading and paging through Dan's book. As you rightly said, as a representative, when you stand in the field and when you open yourself to the field, words you don't normally use come out, phrases and sentences that you don't normally use will come out, body sensations where we feel energy. There might be a tightness of the shoulders or a pain in the stomach. That's all the energy of the person you're representing. And that is what allows the constellation to open. And it informs the next step in the constellation is that process.
Just to go back to how you were describing the process of constellating. So, okay, you allow them to select somebody,
Yes.
and then continue from there.
So, in the selection process, as you rightfully also mentioned a little bit earlier, is for the person constellating, the instruction is go stand in front of each one in the room, feel into the energy, feel if it's the right energy to represent the person they're about to represent. For the representative, the instruction is when a person stands in front of you, you stand up and you make eye contact. So you connect, you make a connection with between the two people. You are asked, Dan, will you represent me? It is a instant intuitive feeling. It's not a mental thought driven question. And in that instant, you know yes or no.
Mm.
And you offer the person your yes or your no.
I always find the people who, for me, constellate best, it's not a competition, but in terms of how deep the work goes, are people who understand their own inner self. So, someone who will feel anger coming up, and they can trace where it's coming from. When you go and you say, what's going on here? What are you feeling? They can say, I'm upset, but it seems that I'm upset because, and they can go delve quite deeply into it, which then again opens up a whole another floodgate of channels that you can go down. I also find, I mean, I know I'm jumping topic, but we're still on family constellations. Two amazing things about it. One is the process of where in the beginning you acknowledge your ancestors. And I like that process because it's not like worshipping or any kind of, dark work. It's more just to turn around and look at the people who came before you, which is your mother and father, and the people that came before them, which is your grandparents on both sides, and the people that came before them, which is your great grandparents before, and you realize how many thousands and thousands and thousands of people had to exist for you to be here today. And just that acknowledgement of like, thank you, and how they must have struggled, because life has never been as easy as it is today, and we get to now be safe enough to do this kind of work. It's quite amazing. And then the second thing I wanted to mention was about resources, bringing resources into the room. But like the fact that you were saying, okay, if someone had alcoholism in their family, which is quite a lot of people, it's a very common, but that actually gets its own representative as an entity because of how much of a powerful force it is. Okay, so we're painting this picture. You have a client, they come into the room, they sit on the chair. You talk them through the process. Everybody else is just waiting to be a participant if they get chosen or not. You go and choose your mother, your father, yourself, and maybe your sibling, depending on what your constellation looks like. You place them in the room, you sit down, and then Gary says, start the process. What are you doing when you start the process? What does it look like? If you can use an example to paint a image, that would be great.
So, absolutely. And I just quickly want to touch on the beautiful vision and energy you brought around our ancestors. And the thing that's always so beautiful for me, what I do when we before we start constellating, is if we only go 9 generations back, Dan. So I always say the person must visualize themselves standing in front, looking forward, their parents behind them, and then their parents and their parents. Mother with the left hand on the left shoulder, father with the right hand on the right shoulder. And so it goes back. If we go 9 generations back, you have 2048 ancestors standing behind you, and you are the tip of the spear.
Wow.
You have 2000, just 9 generations back, 2048 energies flowing through you. All the difficulties they had and all the beauty they had flows through us. So when the constellation is set up and we're about to start, I say to the representatives, start the process. What I look for when the process starts is microfacial expressions in the representatives. I look at body movement in the representatives. And very much I feel into the energy of what is happening in the constellation. Where is there tension? Where is there no tension at all? It's almost like playing chess in a way, energetic chess. It's about finding the right place for each piece on the board where they feel they authentic, they feel seen, they feel held, and they feel part of the system. So the energy field keeps on moving the representatives and moving them until there's a click. For me, it's a energetic click. I feel in my solar plexus. It's an opening, like if I have to explain or describe it, it's a click sensation that happens when I feel, oh, that's where that belongs. And so we will keep on working with the system and moving the system around the whole time, until everyone has their rightful place.
So again, can you use an example of like what does moving the system around
Okay.
mean?
So, a beautiful way I can visually explain that is, the old watches that we had to
Yes.
wind up. So if you take the face off that watch, inside you'll see all the cogs, and each cog has teeth on it. And what happens is the one turns the other, and so they keep on turning each other. In a family system, each person in the family is a cog in the watch.
Yeah.
And if one of the cogs, for whatever reason, leaves or breaks its shape and form, the rest of the people or cogs in the system has one of two options. They either adjust so that the system continues working, or they break the system completely. And that's the energy or the what I feel into.
I mean, it's like organized chaos. That's what it is.
In a way, it can appear that way, yes. What I look for, Dan, is there discomfort in the person representing? What emotions are they showing? And that's always the guide. I will say to the person, what's happening with you? What's the uncomfortableness you're feeling?
Mm.
And they tell me, and that's where the system then takes us. And that's how I guide and manage the flow of the constellation.
And to go back to the representation of it, I'll give an example of the first time that I constellated. Not for myself, I was a participant. So it was a lady constellating. She had 3 kids, and she was constellating about her youngest daughter and her husband was there, but it was the wife's constellation. Okay, sorry. It was her youngest daughter, and she was giving a lot of problems. She was very aggressive, possessive over her father. And whenever anybody else got attention, she would throw tantrums, and then everything became about her. And it was just upsetting the whole family dynamic. And the mom didn't know what to do about it anymore because there was just constant fighting. So she came to constellate. She chose someone to represent her oldest son. Her middle daughter was me. She asked me to represent her youngest daughter, and then her and her husband. Okay, so it was the 5 of them in the constellation. And all of their stuff started conspiring. So people were moving away from each other once the process started. Again, this is my first time ever doing it. I didn't know what to do. All I was told was just feel what you feel. That's it. So immediately I stepped back. I didn't want anything to do with these people. I was like, they are so, in my mind, I was like, I've never met these people before. They're so selfish. I don't want anything to do with them. By the end of the constellation, I was crying and I'm like, what the hell? The facilitator eventually came to me and asked me what's going on. And I just said, I don't feel like I'm a part of this family. I feel like the only person who cares about me is my brother. I just want to be away from all of this. I really, like, no one gives a shit about me, that kind of vibe. And it was weird because afterwards, the mother said to me, like, what you said was 2 weeks ago, my daughter said those words to me. So absolutely bizarre. And then in terms of their constellation, because obviously I didn't play a big role in it, it was about the younger daughter. The facilitator asked, what's your relationship like with your mother? And she said, no, not good. We don't speak anymore. She's an alcoholic and I just don't want her around anymore. So she brought the mother into the constellation. The mother stood far away. She didn't want to be a part of it. Then they brought alcohol in. And she said, did anything traumatic happen in your mom's life to cause her? And she couldn't remember anything. She's like, no, not anything in particular. Then her husband went to the facilitator and said, her mother, she lost her son. To addiction. He was an alcoholic and he died in a car crash. And she started drinking very heavily after the accident. And it's amazing how she had just forgotten that. She wrote her brother off and she wrote her mother off after she became an alcoholic. So they brought the dead brother in. So again, this is an example of the chaos because so much can happen. I mean, it's amazing. People can find out that their father is not really their father. Their uncle is their father in a family constellation. So you got to be careful what you wish for as well. You want to go do the work, you're going to find out some really funny business. But for me, it's like the truth always prospers in family constellations, and also to watch the visual representations of these entities, as well as to come to terms with what hold or grip they have, can allow you to then start the healing process. And I also love family constellations because it always starts out in chaos. There's a lot of emotions involved. It can get ugly, but it always ends up in a process where there is forgiveness, there is healing, there is acknowledgement of place. And so, also, another way that I always describe that is, even if you say, oh, Joe Black is not my father. My real father is my mom's husband who adopted me when I was 2 because he's been around. The fact of the matter is Joe Black is your dad.
Yes.
And you can't, even though you don't have to invite him back into your life, you still need to acknowledge him as your father in that space, because he is your father. That is, like, you can't avoid reality. And the sooner that you can accept the truth and accept your place within the constellation, then you can start to really do the work. Let's say you're the second born child, but you've always been carrying the first. You're never then free of the grip of the first, and the first never feels like they have the authority to hold that space. So once it's all set, as we said, the harp can now harmonize because everybody's been given their rightful place to do.
Yes. So just out of the example you gave of this constellation you were part of, for me, when I work with the system and any form of addiction shows itself in the system, I take in, instead of saying alcohol or the drug that was part of the addiction, instead of taking that in, which for me is a negative energy, I take in someone who can represent substance of avoidance. For me, that's twofold. When you come to constellate, the people representing don't know who you are, they've never met you. They just come because they love the work and they love humanity and they want to give back. So for me, if I then say I'm bringing alcohol into the system, for me personally, and that's just how I work, there's a twofold disrespect. There's disrespect to the person constellating, because everybody does not need to know that there was alcoholism in their family. And the second is a disrespect to the field to bring alcohol in. So I bring substance of avoidance in. And I've seen in my work, and I know you've been present when I constellated, when we brought a substance of avoidance in, thank you, how it completely shifted the whole constellation. And I will always say to the representative representing the substance of avoidance to go and attach to where you belong, because I need to see where this avoidance started. Hand on heart, 9 out of 10 times, the person representing substance of avoidance walked straight to the family member in the constellation who was dealing with the addiction. So I just wanted to say that about that part of the constellation.
What's your favorite part about doing that work?
Beautiful question. For me, my favorite part is seeing the light go on. There is a moment in the constellation where everything just fits, like the puzzle fits perfectly. And what I always say to the client when we start, you're going to set the constellation up the way you see your family. And if I constellated you and any siblings you had at exactly the same time, there would be completely separate and different constellations for each and every sibling, because no 2 siblings has the same parents. That was the first mind explosion I had in this work.
Can you explain a little further?
Absolutely. So when the parents has the first child, they at a new place in their relationship, they at a place in their work development, their emotional, spiritual, and mental development. They do not have children at all. So that's the parents the first child gets. The second child gets parents who already has a child, who is in a different place in their relationship, who is in a different place in their work, mental, spiritual uh, development
Mm-hmm.
stages. And so each child gets different parents because we are, as humans, we're ever evolving energy beings. Our energy is never stagnant, and every child has different parents
That's
in
why, like,
that
the third
regard.
child has it the easiest because, and the first child had many rules, but the third child doesn't have to
Yes,
carry.
yes, that
And
principle.
then, do you mind also explaining about
Birth order.
yes, the birth order?
So, birth order is something I discovered and was taught in my work with the Quest Institute. And every child is born into a specific role within the family. The firstborn child is the eternal bridge builder. Firstborn children has a very difficult time with conflict. When mom and dad is fighting, the firstborn child will do everything in their power to bring mom and dad back together to get them to reconcile because their safety depends on it. That's the burden the firstborn child carries for the rest of their lives. They make brilliant bosses and managers because they'll always want to ensure that their staff is happy. The second-born child is the child who sits in school while the teacher's writing on the whiteboard. They look out the window saying, I wonder what unicorns look like and that they exist. What did that for me, I say they're away with the fairies. They're in their own heads a lot. One day I'm going to create this machine and this system, and they're very in their own minds. The third child born into the system is the square peg in a round world. Third-born children seldom feel that they belong within their family system and in the world. They the questioners, they the way showers for me in a way. They the children who love their family dearly, but they will go and create their own family systems and their own units away from their family. And so like I'm one of 8 children. That's the blessing I was given this lifetime. I come from a very big family, and I am the 7th child. So I am a 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and that's how it goes. There's also energy around the sex of the children. If the firstborn is male, in the utopian perfect system world, the second child should be female, and vice versa. If there's 2 siblings of the same sex, 2 girls, the second born girl will be tomboyish. She will have characteristics
More
of the
masculine.
opposite. Yes,
Okay.
of the opposite sex. She will become daddy's little tomboy
Mm-hmm.
to correct the system. The same with 2 boy children. The second boy child will
Be more feminine.
be more feminine, have more, and I'm not saying gayness or anything, sexual orientation has nothing to do with that. It's energy.
Mm.
You'll see if there's 2 boy children, the second boy child will be a little bit more soft energetically.
Mm-hmm.
They won't always approach everything from a very left brain male
Yeah.
energy. That's also part of the constellation. And I need to say that even if you're born the first child and there's a third or fourth child, children take each other's roles. As a child, energetic, and this is all energetic, it's not premeditated, it's not cognitive, it's absolutely energetic. If, like, I'll use my system for an example. When my father passed, my elder brother, who in the family system and in traditional ways of honoring, he had to step into the male head of the house role. I was 6 when my father passed. And there was something energetically in me that felt that he wasn't doing that. So at 6, I stepped into that role. The fights I would have with my older brother, continuously, we were at each other like cats and dogs growing up because he felt I was trying to take his place in the family. And I felt in my 6-year-old little brain an energy that he wasn't doing what he
He
should
wasn't
be.
protecting your
Yes,
mom.
yes, yes.
Mm.
And that's how we try to take each other's roles. It creates unbelievable tension in the family, unbelievable aggression and anger sometimes,
Yeah.
and a lot of disharmony.
And that's why I say it's amazing to be able to get your place back,
Yes.
because imagine you spend all that time being angry and all that energy towards having a place that's not even rightfully yours versus accepting the truth and then taking your role and pouring goodness into that role of being a support system towards the constellation, that is your family.
Absolutely. And what I do when there's an in person constellation, when the constellation has moved and shifted, and it is at the final, this is the constellation. What I love doing, because it is such a beautiful gesture and a beautiful embodiment of what you just saw happen in front of you, is I take the person constellating, I remove their representative out of the final constellation or final setup in the constellation, and I put the person constellating in there.
Yes.
So that they can feel the energy flowing through the whole system, that it flows through them, so they can anchor and they can really sometimes, for the first time in their lives, Dan, feel the energy of this is where I belong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you've had some really profound breakthroughs, even just in the ones that I've seen, like a 60-year-old man acknowledging his father for the first time. And there's a great deal of power in that, because once again, it's like you can say, oh, I don't care. I don't give a shit about that. But you do. And as we say, it's like you're born into this system
Yes.
that you're constantly trying to avoid, but yet you are part of it. So you can't avoid reality once again. So I like how grounded the work is in that.
Just something beautifully that you reminded me of in that now, and thank you for that, is I always say to clients, you were born with a specific hair color, specific eye color, and specific trauma. Because what we do in constellation work is we look at generational trauma. And trauma, like your hair color and your eye color, is handed down to you by your parents.
Yeah.
And when you constellate and when you work on your family system to correct it, to correct the way you see your system, what actually happens is you feeling. So there is a German constellator who worked very closely with Bert Hellinger, who devised the whole system. And if I can just give you a little bit of background on that, Family Constellations was devised in KwaZulu-Natal. He was a missionary anthropologist, and he came and worked in KwaZulu-Natal doing missionary work. And he saw how the Zulu tribe deals with ancestors and works with ancestors. So he devised the model family constellations out of those observations.
Oh, amazing.
It's beautiful. And for me, it sets my soul on fire because I am an African. I was born in Africa. Being an African coursed through my veins. And that such incredibly gentle and deep energy work comes from an African
From our home.
culture, from our soil. It just fills my soul with such light and gladness and beauty. And I always, so Steffi Gruff, the lady who worked with Bert Hellinger, she famously said, trauma travels through a family until one person is willing to feel it. That one person feeling the trauma
Mm.
dislodges and dissolves that trauma for everyone who has come in the system, every ancestor, everyone still on this field, and every child to be born.
Mm.
So when we do constellation work, for me, it is the most beautiful, loving work I can and have done for my family, so that the incredible and intense trauma I grew up in is not handed down to my nieces and nephews.
Mm.
And that all the trauma I have dealt with in the 20 something years I have gone through in my personal journey, that everything I have done, I didn't do just for myself. I did it for all my loving ancestors, all my loving relatives living now, and for every child yet to be born.
Mm. And it is amazing to watch it unfold, because you do a constellation, you're like, holy shit, that was profound. And then you go about your life, and it's unbelievable because, like, 6 months later, the uncle that you thought you would never speak to again in your life happens to call you and tell you he's been sober for the last 2 years and he's sorry for what he did, and you can be at peace. um yeah, it opens up a whole new world. And I actually didn't finish the story, because now you're saying that, like, that it's passed down and you can feel stuff. To go back to that family that was constellating the daughter, when they brought the dead brother in and the mother, they realized that all of the outlash and the anger and aggression in the youngest child was actually the mother's um,
Wound.
untold stories. And because she's been ostracized from her family, it was lashing out in the young one.
Yes.
So yeah, it's amazing, powerful, underrated work.
Absolutely.
Truly.
And what I want to just, if I could give a visual of how I see what happens, is we take the system, we take the family, and we create a pond by setting them up. Everything that happens in that constellation for the whole system is like pebbles being thrown into the pond, and those ripples.
Mm.
So energy works at exactly the same way. When we heal energy, or when we work with energy and we bring the light into the energy, that healing and that light is like us throwing a pebble into a pond, into the energetic pond. And that energy rings, or like the rings would make on water, that happens
The
absolutely
ripple effect. Absolutely.
energetically
Yes.
to every side and to the above and below. That's how it disperses
Yeah.
the healing through the whole system.
So it's unbelievable.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
powerful.